father says, that's how they treat the people. That's how they treat the people. I still remember that. That was in 1968. By 1979, prison conditions were all right. When I became Minister of Foreign Affairs, some ladies came to me and said the relatives were in prison. They had spoken to the Red Cross to go and improve the prison. And I said, Madams, I'm very happy that you want to improve this prison. Because you see, I was there. Now that your relatives are there, you're going to improve it. Tomorrow, it will be good for all of us. That is why today it's good that we build good prisons for those and not just put them in prison. In prison, we must train people, give them some skills in prison. You know, sometimes I wonder the amount of medical doctors, engineers, political scientists, lawyers who sit, who rot in prison, who rot in the wasteland, poor people's children, who, if given the opportunities, are far more brilliant than we are. I taught students with my PhD. I read some of the papers. These students were more analytical than I was at that age. Brilliant people. So you're wasting all this talent by keeping your people trapped in wretchedness and poverty. You cannot. So the prison system will be improved. But in 1979, Fahnbulleh did not feel that the prison was bad because I was a political prisoner, and I was convinced that being a political prisoner, from the prison I thought I would have been shot. So as long as I stay in prison, it was better than being taken to the gallows. So my calculation was, the longer I stay here, the better. But of course, that did not happen. And thanks to those on the Brownell Commission, thanks to the Liberian people who made it known to the student masses that they will not harbor a treason trial in our execution. Thanks to them. And that is why we say, until we give out the last breath, we will continue to struggle for the upliftment of the people, their participation in the democratization of the society, so that their children will not beg on their knees for a homeland that the fathers will have won for them on their feet. This is our dream, this is our goal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahnbulleh, for coming, providing so much insight. Thank you very much for coming and providing so much insight. In your responses, you have, as my colleague mentioned, addressed most of the issues that have come up as questions. But again, for the enlightenment of the public, would you bear with me as I ask you a few questions which may seem like repetitive? Now, there are stories that the formation of the MPFL was done by Moja, or should I say the MPFL, the stories go, was founded by Moja in Accra, in Aburi, Ghana. Can you comment on this? Is there any truth to this?
Before I begin to answer Commissioner Stewart, I must say, I mentioned here about a young man whose room was by the gallows. I wanted this public manner to pay homage to Commissioner Stewart. He was a young man who was facing the gallows. I want to pay homage.
He was the young man who was facing the gallows.
say this. I remember quite clearly the meeting in Aburi. The meeting in Aburi was the meeting of Moja to take an assessment of the situation, the political and economic situation in Liberia. It was to deal with the question of what will Moja do in case of an elections which were going to be called by the military government. Since our people were all in exile, with the exception of Dr. Amos Sawyer, we asked ourselves, were we prepared to go in an alliance, or were we going to go for the election and challenge Doe? The MPFL was nowhere around. Taylor was still, I think, either languishing in prison or somewhere. I don't know where he was. There was nothing whatsoever. We met in Aburi. We discussed the possibility of reintroducing ourselves into the system for the democratic elections. We left from there with instructions to our militants to come back home and assess the situation, and to then discuss with Brother Sawyer how the party could be registered and what we wanted to achieve. This was before the banning of the LPP and the UPP. So no, Commissioner Stewart, there's absolutely no truth. And I ask you the question, why would Moja militants with the political consciousness, men who had gone through the literature of political struggle, why would they organize and then delegate the leadership to a Charles Taylor? How? There's no truth, it's not possible. We're capable of doing this, and I've said to you, some of us who broke away from the movement later on, decided to take that part. We were capable of leading the struggle. Why a Charles Taylor? And let me tell you something. This is why the Libyans deported some young Liberians who had gone with Joe Wally. He had sent them to Libya. They got there, and all of a sudden, they saw Charles Taylor, and they said to the Libyans, what is this man doing here? The Libyans say he's a friend of Blaise Compaoré, we brought him. They say, no, he's nobody. He shouldn't be here. The Libyans asked them out. That's not true. That's not true. We have never, ever associated with the MPFL. I challenge all the MPFL founders who are alive, whether in America, Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, or in The Hague. I challenge any one of them to come and tell the Liberian people that Moja or Fahnbulleh ever associated with the MPFL. Who are political militants. We just don't follow people. It's not true. Well, not true. We never ever, and we were never ever associated with Mr. Taylor and his MPFL.
Now, there are those who, in their attempt to understand the dynamics of Liberian political history, who always lead the charge that things were all right in Liberia until the quote-unquote progressives came around. Can you comment on that?
I'm sure if you take a very old chief from one of the chiefdoms and ask him, how was Liberia? He'll probably say to you, well, for what my forefathers told me, Liberia was all right until the coming of the Elizabeth. That's the ship that brought the settlers. You'll probably say that. Oh, Liberia was all right before the coming of these people. Let's go back a bit. Elections in 1955. The execution of Dede Kobo and his son. Liberia was all right. The persecution of D12. The persecution of Koli Tamba. The arrest of T.R. Briswell. His death in Belayala. Liberia was all right. The victories in trials of so many people, including my father. The arrest of student leaders. leaders like Emma Comer, Timor Wallace, Quinga Harris. The persecution of people, Liberia was all right. The discrimination, this is your problem. This is your problem. Oh, of course it was all right. It was all right for those who held power. It was all right for the oligarchy. We did not constitute West Point, which is a ghetto of horrendous poverty. We did not put our people on the plantation to work as serfs, sniffing acid for plantation for 5 stone. We did not create these slums and conditions of our people. We only interpreted the reality to them. In the country with such vast economic growth, it is possible to provide low-cost housing for people. It is possible to provide quality education. It is possible to do this and do that. We had no alternative. The worst kind of human being is an educated man who is blind to reality. The worst kind of human being is the educated man who is blind to reality. You are being dishonest. So what did we do? You wanted us to be like our fathers, brothers and uncles, who changed their names and were assimilated and kept quiet? No. That was a different era of history. It was a different era of history. We had come into a position where our movement was the movement for justice in Africa, Moja. We were identifying with liberation movements where black men were taking arms to redeem themselves, to win their liberation. And then we were reading Nkrumah, we were reading Sekou Touré, and you expected us to come and fold our hands and say this system where they wear bowler hat and take off and go to the Masonic craft, and where they throw signs in court to convict people. That this system must last. You know, probably these people who condemn us, it's possible that in the end they will be grateful to us, because our sacrifice made it possible for us all to be here. Unfortunately, a lot of our people died, but for us to be here today, and that we have the opportunity to elect our representatives to talk about transforming our country, they should be grateful, because Mr. Talbot would have left the office. It could have been taken by Mr. Richard Henrys or Mr. X, who believed that we must create more Bantu stands all over the place. It could have been worse. So for God's sake, even if we didn't come, even if Moja didn't come here, even if Paul didn't come, Liberia would have imploded because of the developing contradictions in the society. I was at my father's farm. I sat there, and when he talked, the students from the University of Liberia and Lapad would clap for him. They were understanding what he was saying. Understanding. J. Gus Lubinoff, in his book, The Evolution of Privilege, called that the panic button. Even if we hadn't come, are you telling me that the people will have continued to support, by the poverty and ignorance, a discarded social system and a false and bankrupt aristocracy? Are you saying that to us? Probably you can only say to us that you read the situation well. You can accuse us of being political opportunists, of reading the minds of the people, of understanding the trajectory of history. That you can say. But to say if we had not come, and you really think, if Mandela did not appear, nobody would have come in South Africa. If Dr. Neto, this is the policeman theory of history. That one individual, they can make changes. If the objective conditions are not right, and the people are not willing to listen, you can have changes. We were only articulating, making clear what the people were already feeling, but could not articulate. So how does a poor, hungry man understand that the exploitation going on in Lamco and Firestone, such exploitation was being done through his sweat and blood? was only to show him the reality. To show him the reality. In any society where wealth is so skewed, where 2-3% of the people control 64% of the wealth, that is a recipe for disaster. You don't need no social scientist to tell you that. It's simple. And this is all we did. Now to come back after all these years and accuse us, demonize us, that it is because of us that your peaceful society. What peaceful? Do you know how many rubber tappers were dying every year on the plantations? Do you know how many babies were dying before they could get to the hospitals? What peaceful society you have? A society of security agents all over. Society rule, through taboo, and method of dying society. Please understand your history better. We did what we wanted to do in the context of our time. My generation felt that we could not live like our father's generation. And because of that, we agitated for democratic changes. Whatever happened through that, these were unintended consequences. But so is history. History has a lot of unintended consequences. Men do not set out to change history the way they want, simply because they do not have the ability. They are not gods to say history will do this if I do this. No. It happened. These are unintended consequences. It could have come with a soldier just been frustrated because he was not paid adequately by his boss, and he would probably shot him. So probably we must understand our history better. Don't blame us. Don't blame us for what happened to your society. Blame your history. Blame your history. Your history of iniquity, of injustice, of arrogance, of brutalization, of imprisonment, of hounding of the people's children. That is your history. That was what was rectified, or the people thought they had rectified. You can't come to a country. You can't come to a country and rule for 100+ years and still have the highest rate of illiteracy with one of the fastest growth rates after Japan since the Second World War. You cannot. You cannot accept you keep the people in chains, keep them blind, keep them illiterate. But the contradiction was that you had to open the system, send them to schools, bring television, because you were part of the globalized world. And the people's children asked questions. The slave revolts in America were carried out by slaves who had read the Bible. Because the Bible said, if you close your ears to the cries of the poor, you too will cry. They read that. So they went against the old slave mentality. You say to the people, you are Liberians, you have a constitution, and then you keep them in wretchedness on the plantations, etc., and you expect the sons to sit and say, I must be somebody. The only way I can promote myself is to change my name from Collie to Dooms or whatever. No. That is an identification of oppression. Because what you are telling your people, you don't have any identity. It was not for nothing that brothers came from America and started changing the names back to the original. It was a form of protest. A form of protest. I can sympathize with those brothers. I didn't have to do it because my father, being a conscious man, said my older sister will be called Miata, Aminata. I will be called Boima, Boima, or Ibrahim. My brother will be called Bokai, Abubakar. So we knew where we came from. But other brothers had seen the contradictions, so they came back. This system is not right. I do not have to be a Mr. X to be accepted. I'm educated. I do not have to join the Masonic craft to be somebody. I will go a step further and say, I don't have to be a member of a particular church or marry into a particular family to be somebody. This is my country. And people must be promoted on the basis of merit. It's nobody's farm. It's not your farm. It's your country. It's my country. And the same way you are passionate about a country, I too am passionate about my country. And if you institute tyranny, as a nationalist and patriot, it's my duty to oppose you. And that we will do. Some people, in a attempt at demonization, refer to us as recycled politicians. I said in a speech, insofar as injustice is recycled, we will be around, we will be recycled. Insofar there is injustice and poverty, we will be around, we will be encircled. Because we have to fight against this. If we must build a society of cohesion, a society of unity, we must begin to respect every man and woman, irrespective of where they come from. No matter who they are. You cannot claim any special right to the soil because your father was from Morovia, grew up. Your symbols, a young brother said to you, look at your symbols. Look at your symbols. We've been saying it for years. Years. You don't want to meet in the National Sovereign Conference and deal with this question of your symbol. They're symbols of domination. The symbols of domination. And so your falsified history must be rectified. And people say, but the history has not been written. It is not that it has been written, it's that you have not read the history. That is the problem. You've read the history that you want to read, that they want you to read. There's a lot of history out there. We deal with Liberia and the crisis in Liberia. The problem of identification. Who are we? And let me say something, it's just a joke. I was saying to a brother in Nigeria, I said, the war is terrible. It's terrible. But there is something positive. Many of our people, especially from our so-called upper class, they have come to Ghana, Nigeria, they've gone to Sierra Leone, Guinea. I said they now realize that so-called civilized, educated women from the upper class wear African costume. They feel proud. I said, in my country, they thought only market women wore these things. Before they stopped, they went to the national functions, burning heat, gloves, bowler hats. These people, I said to him, these people never thought they were African people. They never thought they were African people. That is your history. So examine your history. See the crisis that you developed. And your tragedy is that your fathers and forefathers, most of them were not courageous enough to confront the problems. So they threw the problems on the lap of their children, and their children inherited the problems, like Talbot and others, who inherited the problems. But whether I can tell you something, do or no do, Moja or no Moja, Pal or no Pal, PVP, the way this society is organized or was organized, it was just a matter of time. Just a matter of time. That's when we came in.
Thank you. Now, against the backdrop of what has been said, and I have reference to what you referred to earlier about Herman Cohen, former Assistant Secretary of State. Against the background of what he said during the TRC hearings in the U.S., would you opine that the involvement of Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire in the Liberian crisis somehow received the tacit approbation of the U.S.?
Let me say, the late Ahmed Sékou Touré had said to us, A.B. Talbot had been killed together with Barney Sherman. After the execution of Thomas Wetend, I had taken over the foreign ministry after Barkas Matthews. And Samuel Doe sent Podia and myself to Guinea to go and explain to Sékou Touré that the late Wetend had killed A.B. Talbot. Our delegation got to Guinea and they took us to the Palais de Peuple. Of course, Ahmed Sékou Touré, widely read, he understood so much. The first thing he brought up said, I noticed that your students are agitating.